Hi, welcome to VMworld 2014 vBrownbag opening acts. This is the storage panel. I know you've all been waiting for this, and obviously we've got a very energetic crowd here today. Sorry, that was, yeah. There you go. Excellent. The king of field days is here himself, Mr. Foskett. So everyone, at the count of three, say SIFs. 1, 2, 3. No. SIFs. Sorry. You got to start a storage panel off that way. Sorry. My name is Keith Norbie. At Keith Norbie is my Twitter handle. Maybe if we could just go down the panel here and introduce who you are. Definitely get Twitter handles and just a quick snippet about your background.
Michael Webster, I'm VCDX number 66, based in New Zealand, Senior Solutions and Performance Engineer for Nutanix, and VCDX NZ001 on Twitter.
I'm at Vogt, Solutions Architect for SimpliVity, and I'm based in Minneapolis, and my Twitter handle is @MattVogt.
My name is Jay Metz. I am a storage product manager for Cisco, and my Twitter handle is @DrJMetz.
Hi, my name is Wade Holmes. I'm a senior architect with VMware in the software-defined storage team. I'm VCDX number 15, and my Twitter handle is WHolmes.
My name is Matt Cowger. I'm a global architect for EMC and an executive, obviously. And thanks, CRN. And my Twitter handle is @MCowger.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Obviously, a very heavyweight storage panel, and as well an audience to equal them. So I think a great thing to kick off with, we're here for one reason, it's VMworld. Wade, you represent VMware, so maybe we'll just kick it off with you and say, you know, what can we expect, all of us attendees here, related to storage and VMworld?
So, related to storage VMworld, probably the big, there's going to be a number of announcements. Obviously, Virtual SAN has been in the industry now and GA'd in March and has had a great reception. So there are going to be a number of things in software-defined storage area, but it's going to be mainly about how Virtual SAN fits into a data center as underneath an overarching storage policy-based management umbrella. So with that, there's going to be a lot of talk with vVols. Obviously, we've heard about vVols for a while now, but it's actually going to come to fruition very soon. And that's going to show how Virtual SAN, vVols meshes together so that it's all one happy umbrella with VMware and the rest of our partners.
Excellent. So vVols, what has it been, 3, 4 years? It's a joke, but it's been around. It's been out there for a long time. Who here would like to comment on vVols? Why do we even need vVols? And who wants to take a shot at a couple of comments related to that?
Well, just why don't we start by defining what vVols are?
Thank
right?
you.
I mean, realistically, if it hasn't even been GA'd yet, there's probably people who haven't heard about it.
So basically, vVols are the ability for the storage policy-based management umbrella that VMware is, or storage policy-based management vision that VMware has to be extended to the arrays of our partners, basically SAN arrays. So it allows you to be able to provision per VM objects and associate policies per VM object from traditional storage arrays. We've had that ability with Virtual SAN, and now we're going to extend that to storage arrays from any vendor that decides to implement vVols within their solution.
Great. So any questions on what vVols is? Does anybody know? And then the natural question would be, why do we need vVols? You know what?
Because LUNs suck so hard.
Yeah,
File systems suck so hard.
That is one thing I think we can all agree on, Matt. LUNs suck.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyone for LUNs?
Pro LUNs.
And yeah, exactly. So that's the heart of the question. You know, I think one of the great parts about VMworld is the community comes together, and we help to define problems that we're trying to address, along with the things that VMware unfolds on us, and that unfolds differently through different partners. They unfold differently through EMC and through Cisco and through SimpliVity and through SolidFire and HP and Dell and everybody else that's architecting towards this. But again, if you're designing for storage on VMware, what is so wrong with the way it is today, or where are you trying to get to? Either the next evolution of software defined or whatever you're trying to get to. What's the big issue today then with LUNs in a VMware environment, or this whole reason for vVols?
So the reason that LUNs are
You can say it.
are not optimal
You can say it.
or LUNs suck is that basically it's a challenge operationally when you're provisioning storage in an environment. And you have a virtual administrator, vSphere administrator that needs to provision virtual machines, and then you have your storage administrator, and as you provision virtual machines, you do not have typically have the exposure to know what is the underlying capability of this LUN, when you're going to run out of capacity, if I want to define specific availability or performance criteria on a per VM basis. What LUN do I put it in? How do I know when to stop and it's going to impact performance? And that's the whole goal of vVols, is to change the operational model so that when you provision a virtual machine, your vSphere admin is able to have policies bubbled up from the capabilities of the storage array and select those capabilities on a per VM basis. So whether it's replication or encryption or dedupe or whatever it is that underlying storage engine or SAN allows, the VM admin will be able to select that policy and have complete exposure and visibility to what he's getting when he provisions a VM.
So I'm going to adjust what I said a little bit. LUNs don't suck. The implementation of how VMware uses LUNs and manages LUNs, especially at a scale above tens, sucks. The limit of 256 devices was, and continues to be unbelievably short-sighted. In all honesty, if that had been removed, and you look at any modern Linux, for example, that'll support thousands and thousands of LUNs or file systems or whatever, if we'd had that limit removed 3 years ago, and then added in some of those things like some form of automation controller. I'm not going to get overly product-y, so I'm not going to say the thing that we make, but some sort of automation controller to manage those. I honestly I'm not sure that vVols would actually be necessary.
So yeah, Matt brings up a good point, and because one question people have, because people are familiar with storage, like, okay, what's the difference between having a vVol object provisioned to a VM and having a RDM or raw device mapping provisioned to a VM, which would give you that one-to-one relationship. As Matt mentioned, there are limits. You can only have up to 256 RDMs, so your scalability, that just wouldn't scale in any real environment. There are still the application of storage policy-based management and bubbling that through vVols is a big deal. If you get into technical details, that could have been done with RDM if we didn't have these scalability limits, but that's
exactly.
Yeah.
You could have just extended VASA, which has been done as part of vVols, and accomplished much the same thing without needing to change the protocol on the wire.
So basically, vVols is the way to alleviate this issue while gaining the operational efficiency and visibility of storage capabilities to the vSphere admin.
If you didn't have bottlenecks and limitations for single LUNs and things like that, though, and you could still do VM-based operations, you wouldn't need thousands of LUNs or any orchestration around LUN management either. But the problem is we've got QDEPs and we've got all of these bottlenecks that have been around for years. So we need to address that by putting some solutions on top so that you can still get the policy-based management that you need from a virtualization layer from the applications down, which is the reason we have virtualization in the first place, is to run applications.
Good point. Okay, let's hold that for a second. We got a question. By the way, before we get into questions, good questions get nice little VM Underground or vBrownbag wristbands. So
do the panelists get to vote on whether or not it was a good question?
So it's a good observation, let's put it that way. So question in the back.
You said that vendors have evolved, I think.
Okay, so let me restate the question just in case everyone didn't hear it. You said vVols is going to need to be supported, and I think you're curious about who's going to support vVols? Or is everyone going to need to support vVols when it becomes announced? Was that the crux of the question? Yeah.
It'll be an array by array and vendor by vendor approach. I know NetApp and EMC and Dell and HP have all come out saying they have supported or will support it in the very near future. It's not going to be across all array lines off the bat. It's going to be pretty select, but as array vendors update their storage OSs, it'll roll out. But it's not going to be universal off the bat.
I've got a note on that, but anybody else want to comment on that?
It's also worth noting that just because vVols is now supported on some arrays and on whatever version it end up getting supported on for the hypervisor, doesn't mean that you have to stop doing what you already did. So
it's a great point. These are sometimes very evolutionary designs rather than rip and replace. And I'll get the questions here in just 1 second. The thing I'll say about vVols is that what you'll see is you'll start to see an emergence probably at this VMworld here of who's really in the first layers of meaningful engineering, and look for the differentiation, because there won't just be, hey, yeah, I support vVols. Yep, there'll be, well, who supports inline efficiency for vVols? Who supports X, Y, and Z for vVols? And how many objects can you support in a vVols implementation? These are all super important questions depending upon what's important to you in your environment or what you're trying to design for.
It was similar to VAI when that first came out. A lot of the storage vendors didn't support every single feature of VAI. That kind of rolled out over time as well.
Okay, so question in the back there.
So what's actually happening at the array level?
Okay, so good question. What happened, and I think the question was what happens at the array level? Yep. So break it down to the array level, a little finer grain. What happens in vVols that's different?
Yeah, can I have a complete packet walk, please, in 5 minutes?
So I mean, if you really want to, yeah, we can do that. A lot of what's happening under the hood is entirely up to the vendor, right? So whether or not a LUN gets created, or whether or not some file systems get created and glommed together, or whatever a vendor wants to do, whatever's best for their system, is what they'll do under the hood. The only thing that vVols specifies is how you actually talk to it. All it specifies is an API. How you implement that API under the hood, just like any good API, right, is entirely up to that vendor. So I can guarantee you that Cisco is doing it differently than EMC. And in fact, EMC, we got how many storage different products? At least 5, 6, whatever.
Doing it different for different products.
We're doing it differently for different groups. Like XtremeIO and vMax, they're actually using a very similar implementation, and they're working together to do it. But the VNX team is doing something entirely different. So the only thing that vVols specifies is how it works on the wire. If you wanted the really interesting thing, if you really look at it, most of the games are actually being played in reserved fields on the SCSI side of things, and on the NAA identifiers is actually how they're doing it a little bit.
And I think it's also worth noting, or fair to note, that they're not releasing vVols at VMworld here, so you're not going to be implementing anything outside of, at best, any beta things. So I'm not sure if the timeline is, when next year, but they'll probably provide more details at the keynote. But it's interesting to study up on.
Wait, did you just announce it was going to be next year?
I just announced it could be next
Jason
year.
Nash?
I think you selectively pulled one word out, but that's okay. You guys do that. Yeah. Yeah, so the comment was that there was a vendor that he'll rename for you if you want. And there's several of them that will all have vVols commentary demos. Again, I would encourage everyone just to kind of go seek that out. And if you want offline, I think we can all name the vendors of who's going to be there, and we'll keep it more vendor neutral. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's prepared to answer that yet. Probably still unknown.
That has not been announced.
Yeah, so the question was, is vVols going to be included in vSphere, whatever the next version is, or is it going to be a separately licensed thing like vSAN is, or like Enterprise Plus version to get the distributed switch? Hard to tell. None of us here are product licensing specialists, so that's not what we're going to be able to answer. Sorry.
So when vVols is released, it's there to resolve some of the issues that we experienced with LUNs. So I assume that it's going to be strictly for block-based storage. Is that correct?
It also addresses issues with file systems, and it works with NFS and block.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Question.
What advances are being made for the smaller business? I mean, I'm one person running all the storage, my team being one other person. But I've got a
finding myself buying storage equipment based on how easy is it for me to manage. Is vVol's going to help bring this together for me, make my life a little easier?
Yeah, great question. So to repeat the question, it's, what about the small, medium business? What's the answers there? How do I get better efficiencies or ease of management? I'm still growing quite a bit in data. Does vVols help you in the SMB? Anybody want to respond?
I think that's the idea behind vVols and a lot of the other vendors that are doing storage out now, is they're seeing a lot of collapsing of responsibilities in environments. And so the idea is to bring a lot of efficiencies to those environments and to those storage admins and VMware admins that are seeing their scope kind of creep outside of their general area.
I've seen a lot of storage that it's really good storage, but the management side of it is just, I don't have the time. That hiring somebody else with budget.
Actually,
There's going to be a lot of solutions on the show floor at VMworld this week that can help you around the management of that in those environments where you've got the same requirements as an enterprise, but where you've got a very small team. So vVols may or may not be the right solution, but there are plenty of solutions that can address those problems this week.
Absolutely.
one question back there.
So does this mean I'm not going to have to log into a separate storage management interface then? I can take care of it all through the central, the vCenter client provision storage?
So I think, is there a question that are vVols going to be able to be managed through the vCenter client, or?
Right, so is it, am I no longer going to have to log into or connect to a storage interface, admin interface, and start make ones there and increase sizes if I don't take care of the vCenter client instead?
Sure. So for the admin's perspective, what can they expect? Is there a big operational change for how you access? Yeah, so could a VM admin be able to administer storage, or you got to get the storage guy involved to do the vVols heavy lift?
So that is part of the concept. There's the storage admin will still have to provision a logical construct that acts as a container, and then within that container, and depending on the storage array, that container is implemented in different ways. It may be a aggregate with NetApp, or it may be different technology depending on the vendor. But then the VM admin, then he will see that container as a data store, and then he will be able to provision his VMs with VMDKs, and when he provisions those VMs with VMDKs, those will be vVols. So it will be the VM admin having the ability to provision vVol objects, but there will be an initial container that is provisioned by the storage admin.
I think it's worth stressing that's a one-time activity.
Yes, that's a one-time activity. It's not every time, so it's not the same as LUNs.
Okay, and just for time administrative standpoint, I think it's like 23 after the hour, so we got to meter the time, make sure we get through all the other topics related to storage, and we're going to dig a little deeper into vVols because there's a ton of questions, and in my personal opinion, I think this is one of the most mysterious things that people want to dig into because there's been kind of a lack of information at the deep levels, so we'll crack this thing up a little further. Question over here?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any kind of migration path to a vVol from, let's say, a VM that already exists in physical RDM. I mean, obviously, one would start with Motion or other VMDKs, but let's say you have Oracle racks that want to shift over so you get the benefits of using vVols.
So
Did I hear Oracle Rack there?
All right, so again, I'll have to repeat the question
that.
for recording purposes. I'll have to repeat the questions of the audience. The question was, if you've got a VM with an RDM or some other VMFS setup, is there a migration process to go to vVols? Maybe I want to take a shot.
I'm pointing at you.
He's certainly not pointing at me.
So from RDM to vVol, so you definitely could perform a storage vMotion. That is, as far as whether there are specific underlying capabilities of the storage array to perform it en masse, I think that depends on the storage array.
Wade, I think you got ambushed, by the way, getting put on this panel.
Are
you doing
Whoever
a
did that,
vVol
great job.
presentation?
The vVol panel.
If it's an Oracle,
I am not. Rawlinson Rivera.
Okay.
Okay, Rollins.
if it's an Oracle
you are.
I'm doing
database,
one with
though.
Susie.
Down here,
Oh, excellent. Okay.
down here is next. I might need some underground spotters, to kind of cue me up here. The Q diff starts here, though.
So in terms of storage and vVols and trying to simplify how vSphere industry admins kind of manage the storage layer. I'm just wondering what kind of trade-offs are there when you take vVols and you've now kind of extracted away what's actually going on under the hood on the storage array. Do you lose any ability to really fine-tune what's going on? I mean, are we just generalizing everything to make it kind of multi-purpose, or do you really still need to have that fine-grained control?
So that's entirely up to the array vendors.
Okay.
There's really two parts to vVols, right? There's the change that happens on the wire, that happens both for block and there's some very, very minor changes that happen for NFS on the wire. Some of the labs tests that at least the EMC teams did were unable to identify a performance difference in terms of the on-the-wire changes. So in that scenario, from a performance perspective, that's going to vary per vendor, right? But I honestly doubt that any vendor is going to have any huge major change in terms of performance. From a capabilities perspective, like, will you now no longer be able to replicate this now that it's in a vVol? That I think potentially will change on a per vendor basis and a per implementation. The initial versions may not support replication of that device, whereas some follow-on version might. But again, that's going to be a per vendor kind of thing.
Okay, we'll have a couple more questions, but just before I do, I want to get a quick poll of the audience to see, because we got the SMB over here represented, and I always like to get a sense, I think, for everybody here. What do you guys, I guess, manage or administer? Is maybe I'll have a show of hands first for who manages the SMB environments out here, or architects to them.
Do you want to maybe define SMB? Because I think everybody defines that differently.
Well, that could be a whole nother panel.
I'm asking you to make something up.
Let's operationalize.
Is this a Salesforce.com audit here or what? No, so SMB would be, I guess, under 100 VMs, maybe is a good way. Since it's VMware, let's define it by VMs. And if we're talking, hundreds to thousands of VMs, that's a medium environment. And then, tens of thousands of VMs, you're an enterprise environment, probably even thousands. So SMB environment, we got a good chunk of people here, hands down. What about the medium environment, managing hundreds and maybe thousands of VMs? Okay, all right, hands down. Now, what about tens of thousands of VMs? Any large scale?
I'm sorry.
At-scale environments? Okay. Good. That gives us a good sense for, I think, who we're monitoring to. And I think the medium kind of rules anyways, in terms of the numbers. So next question on vVols back there.
So Matt was talking about replication. What do you handle as conditions, vVol replication? I understand it's going to be based on the vendors choosing replication medium, let's say. But do you think replication initiation is going to be controlled from the VMware? You make a policy, replicate to where? Because all of that is completely undefined, I think, right now in many specs.
Yes.
Interesting what you guys think.
So the question is, again, vVols replication being one of those definable categories or subsets of a vVol. What's the kickoff process from the storage perspective? Is that something that...
Can I take that to just a little bit to start with? So the whole concept behind vVols is you can do operations at the VM level. So that means you can do snapshots at VM level, replication at the VM level. So you don't have to fail over a LUN or anything like that. You just do whatever the policy says and have differentiated policies for those virtual machines based on whatever service levels you need to do. So that's the whole concept. Now, how it's implemented and what's available when it ships and all that stuff, I don't know, per vendor.
Yeah, per vendor. Question in the back.
I don't know if it's a redundant question, but what kind of monitoring capabilities you want to get with vVols on the VMware level? Can you identify like workloads that are causing bottlenecks on the storage side? Can you really figure that out by getting a report from VSCOM or
VCOps? Yep.
Can you look for those kind of like criteria alerts or some sort of reporting?
So thank you, because we just lifted out of storage for a quick second and we started getting into some manageability things, which is what we all need to do at scale. And so the question was with vVols, how does this show up in terms of monitoring and management? Is that one of the definable parts of a vVol, or is that something that floats up into the framework like a VCOps or something else?
And that's something that floats up into the framework. You're going to have vendor-specific tools, but typically you're going to still want to utilize VCOps and have specific plugins for VC ops as you would with your traditional storage arrays today.
If you're not using VC ops, please start.
One of the biggest problems with LUNs is that the storage administrator doesn't know what's going on. So they lose some of that visibility unless the storage administrator's got access to vCenter and has access to those tools. So in concept, vVols should give the storage administrator much better visibility into exactly what's going on in the storage system at a per VM level. So you don't get problems in cross-communication between teams.
Okay, 2 more questions, and then we got, oh my God, we got 4 more questions. There's a hands-on labs on vVols. You want to come up here and tell us about it?
There it is. So there's a hands-on lab on vVols. There we go.
Well, because because it's kind of funny, although we don't have a ton of details, yet we have a hands-on lab for it. So I find that interesting. Question over here.
So is there going to be support for like Microsoft clustering service and the failover for like Exchange, stuff like that? Is that going to change from like RDMs?
Is there going to be? So the question was, does vVols introduce a different operational task for Microsoft clustering? Is that changed from RDMs? Anybody want to comment?
Can we ask a question for that question? So why are people still using RDMs? Why are people still using failover clustering?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, but why? What's the requirement that it's meeting? And why can't that requirement be met by something else? Like we had an Oracle Rack example before. Oracle Rack just runs on virtual machine disk, VMDKs. We don't need RDMs. Microsoft failover clustering, yes, we need RDMs, but why are you running a Microsoft failover cluster when there are plenty of other options to provide high availability?
So it's for DAGs?
As like DAGs, or always on availability groups if it's SQL Server, that sort of stuff. Yeah, okay, so never fail. Yeah, it's another option.
Well, I think one thing's been proven in the IT industry, no one has one single answer, so I guess that's how we go.
Especially
Yeah,
us.
question over here.
So, I really hate being with snapshots. I want to know if VADP will orchestrate vVols to run snaps.
That's a great question, man.
All right, so the question was about snapshots and VADP running snapshots. Anyone want to take an expansion of that?
So as far as native snapshot capability of vSphere versus the capabilities of a storage array, so absolutely that is one of the capabilities that we want to bubble up on a per VM basis based on the snapshot capability of the storage array. Now, as far as integration with VADP, that is going to depend on the not natively, but that's going to depend.
On what?
On.
So if I have a backup vendor and I'm doing VADP backups, will that surface through the vVol, the storage array?
The API does not change hugely.
So yeah, it's going to depend on the backup vendor's integration with VADP.
Okay, maybe one last question in the back then. Thanks.
On that, so we chucked the term API around a little bit. So I'll go back to that manageability. Will we be able to drive this through a VCO workflow or a VCAC blueprint or something of that nature?
Great question. Maybe steers it towards Vasa or whatever you want to comment on that. The question was on vVols and API manageability.
So yeah, so the API endpoints, this will all be exposed through vSphere API endpoint, or specifically a SPBM API endpoint. So you will be able to script the provisioning and also script to automate the provisioning of SPBM policies through the vSphere SOAP API endpoint and the SPBM SOAP API endpoint.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question back there.
I was just going to ask about performance characteristics of the underlying storage. Is that part of that, or is it policy driven, or does it have to be defined? Do you have to say, hey, this is our top tier?
Yeah, so good question. On vVols, do you have to define some of the characteristics of the storage, or do you have any insights from what you have available in the characteristics of the array as part of that defining attribute?
Implementation dependent. Really, the only thing that vVols defines is a little bit of changes of storage protocol on the wire, and some standardized ways to answer certain questions that get bubbled up via VASA, like replicated or not, that sort of thing. And then there's also some vendor-specific extensions to VASA, where the vendor can say, look, this is, because, for example, I'm going to give an EMC example, so don't shoot me here. EMC uses the word fast, right, to describe our storage tiering. There are plenty of other vendors with other forms of storage tiering that call it a completely different name, where it is fundamentally the same idea, right? But we would never actually consider that we would want to use a standard term, right?
Why would we do that?
Why would we do that?
Yeah.
So these kinds of things like fast policy set for highest available, that's going to show up in a vendor-specific part of the spec. So you'll certainly be able to choose it, but it's going to be vendor implementation specific.
Okay, so for time reasons, we'll have to move on to another topic, even though great questions, and you definitely check these guys offline. Wade, if you get in trouble, I think anyone here would hire you, so don't worry about it. We got you covered. Yep. So I think we want to get a couple more categories in if we could. I know I want to hit on Flash because that's definitely something that'll be kicked around at this conference quite a bit. But first, let's talk maybe about, you mentioned vSAN, which introduces the whole topic of converged, hyper-converged, or if Jeremiah Dooley's in here, we could talk about web scale.
He's on the other.
He's on the other side.
So maybe at this count of three, we'll get.
Yeah.
Just to be fair, when you see Jeremiah say web scale to him, he loves that.
Let's do that.
Yeah, exactly. So who wants to take the topic? Maybe just kick it off about hyperconverged. Let's just take that. And since vSAN kind of is, been kicking around in that realm, Nutanix obviously came to market. SimpliVity is in that market, but you've got your own definition of what you guys are doing. EMC's jumping in with something. So we've got a lot of characteristics here of people that have plays and rolling through. So who wants to comment maybe from the panel just to kick it off and maybe go with some questions going on hyperconverged and I guess what matters?
So can I start just by saying that the reason everything's moving to this is just to make everybody's lives easier, because there's a lot of things that are way too complicated than they need to be, and being able to operate an environment with a very small team, even if you've got a big team, just making it more simple and making everything standard so that it can scale and grow more easily. I mean, that's what all of the vendors are trying to achieve with hyperconverged, in my opinion anyway.
Okay.
I'm not sure I'd agree that everything is moving towards that. I think there are definitely some of the environments, certainly the S and the M sizes of virtualization environments are absolutely going to move that direction. But if you look at like the DL980 and the Superdome-based, like giant databases that hell you're an expert on, right?
Absolutely.
I don't think that those are going to go hyper-converged anytime in the next 5 years.
Well, no, but it's about moving that benchmark line, right? So I think that I get to talk.
Yes.
We've been
I was changing the game for over here. Yeah. Get the heat off Wade a little bit here.
So I think I come from I'm probably I'm the only networking centric person on the panel, and we've noticed a change from the networking side in the questions that we're getting from customers. In particular, when you start looking at the end-to-end picture, and of course with storage and networking, the propeller spins in two completely different directions. So what's happening with the hyperconvergence, and it started off with the block systems, is that we've moved the needle into this area where what was previously dedicated fiber channel SANs has now been moved into a much more holistic way of doing things. So what's been happening is that I think that the number of workloads that we can put onto these kinds of hyperconverged environments wind up being more applicable to a wider variety of customers and deployments. And yet at the same time, from a networking perspective, we're trying to figure out, okay, so if we create these pods of these hyperconverged locations, and I'm using my words very carefully here, how do we interconnect them? Because I've got my own questions about vVols and distance and inter data center stuff, and it's for another time. But when we create these pods of vSAN environments and connected in the vVol stuff, how do we interconnect those into larger zones and pods and that sort of thing? So we're seeing on the networking side a great deal of moving from what we had in a very close to the host application workload is now moving into a broader sense. So
becoming
we're
more
seeing that
distributed.
Yeah, so it's more distributed, but it's
Yeah.
also more applicable to a larger number of people.
Yep.
So the mystery's going on.
And you'll probably only hear me say this once this week. I agree with Matt. And the reason for that is, so basically these massive old Unix systems and mainframes and stuff like that, they're not going to be moving to hyperconverged systems very soon. Okay, and they'll probably die a death on the platforms that they're on, and they'll eventually get rewritten for something that can scale out and can be more simple.
Yeah, true.
Yep. So I think two great inflammatory things came out of what was just said between all these guys. One was Fiber Channel. Does anybody still think Fiber Channel is still legitimate? Is that still something that people need?
It's more of a niche use case.
Okay.
Yeah. It's becoming more of a niche.
It's like tape.
And no.
Becoming, maybe?
That's why I said becoming. It's not.
Well, I mean,
this is going to.
That's like saying credit card transaction systems are becoming more niche. I mean,
we still have mainframes. They're niche right now.
Well, but I think that what happens is the rising tide raises all boats.
That's right. I guess.
And the thing is that nobody, and I mean nobody, is coming to any vendor and saying, you know what, next year I'm going to have less data.
Definitely not.
Right?
No.
And the thing is that the reality of the situation is that as we start to explore and expand the kind of workloads that we apply inside of a data center, we're going to see, not just with the tiering with the storage arrays itself, but the tiering with the networks. Mm-hmm. And the reality is all that data is going to increase. All of it. And all that data is going to increase on a wire. All of it.
Right.
And the thing that I'm having a major issue is that we start with the virtual machine arguments and we start with the array arguments. And we're like, I'm going to increase my virtual machines. I'm going to increase my array size. And yet, my network seems to be the same.
So maybe having a solution where the data is really close to the virtual machines might be a good idea.
And there's an accordion way of doing it. He kind of says this half jokingly, but it's true. There's an accordion approach. Right, there's a compression and an expansion within the data centers as we move along with these different types of architectures and topologies. Right? And so we're in a point now where we're starting to compress things inside closer to the host, and then we're going to expand it again with the networks being more distant because it becomes more cost efficient as we leapfrog the technologies over networking and storage and hosts. It's just one of the main. She's got a question.
Yeah, question. Thank you.
I was just going to say, I think we're going to find that both are going to be applicable. We're finding that some virtual SAN vendors have figured out how to do that scale-out distributed type of environment for robo, for other reasons, and they still need networking. So I think what's going to happen is I think we're going to see virtual SAN and physical SAN somewhere in the middle to be able to handle the new applications we have coming out today that are dealing with scale-out and tend to cater to scale-out. But then, we've got those old applications where people don't want to break them. It's like they've been here for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't want to break it. I don't want to touch it. It's written in COBOL. It's going to stay.
Yep.
So I think what's going to happen is it's just going to end up on the spectrum. I think we're going to see everything.
Some of them might P2V. That might be it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Because you can virtualize a VAX if you wanted to, running VMS, and it runs perfectly fine in a virtual machine in a VMware environment.
Oh yeah, virtualization's been out since what, the 60s, 70s, so
Yeah, but I mean, you can take a VAX or an Alpha and run it as a virtual machine on x86 server right now, if you want to. You don't have to change the applications sometimes just to virtualize these things.
Okay,
or perhaps you should change the application if you haven't been thinking about it that long.
Yeah,
yes.
True. But reality.
There's a whole bunch of shoulds.
Matt, or the application owners will change you.
No.
Yeah.
In Soviet Russia, the applications changed
see
you.
Platform 3 for reference on that. In the back.
Yeah, do you think that you said small and medium, do you think that's going to help drive virtualization like closer to the super small business? If we're looking at customers today that only have 5 terabytes of useful data, running 35, 40 virtual machines in a small business, they find SAN to be extremely expensive, right? Unnecessary item. And that's an exciting thing for us as a service provider. We're looking at like basically micro private clouds, being able to take them down and even better automate them because you're not dealing with these massive reference architectures, SAN headers, filers, all that stuff. It's 3 servers
So I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see anybody that's my boss in here. In all honesty, I think if you're that customer, if you got 5 terabytes and 30 virtual machines, you should not be running an environment yourself at all anyways.
Yeah.
I think you should be running it on VCHS or
Yep.
Rackspace or AWS or whatever is relevant for you. I don't think that belongs on your dime.
Okay, way back. From which kind of technologies?
Like containerization.
Oh, containerization.
Yeah.
Docker.
So,
Energy Docker.
Yeah.
Give that man a bracelet. Good question.
Yeah, that's a good
That's
question.
a good question. I would say you will. But my personal opinion, and this is not my company opinion necessarily, is that I think containerization and virtual machines work really well together. So there's no reason why you can't do it right now.
So it's an and, not an or.
I reckon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously,
5 minutes.
Sorry, time check.
Yeah, question back there.
This is a loaded question. Are we going to hear about a hyperconverged product solution from VMware?
Wow, Wade, do you want to preempt the keynote tomorrow?
We want to be able to.
You can.
Yeah. Wade still needs a job.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I would say check the session schedules.
Yeah. We'll destage that question. I got one more question, and then I want to move on to the last topic real quick.
This actually ties them together. Do you see vVols and hyperconvergence giving you data locality?
So the question was vVols and data locality in a hyperconverged system. Does that kind of come hand in hand, where vVols allow for some data locality? Does data locality matter? Anyone want to grab that?
I think data locality is an interesting topic of discussion. A number of hyperconverged vendors or convergence vendors define it differently, whether it's even necessary or not. Some actually say we don't want that, and some say we absolutely have that, and so at all costs do that. So it's a spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that's a vVols thing to define. I think that's a convergence vendor thing to define. I think as far as just the vVols and the convergence space goes, I think you're going to see as vVols develops over time, you'll see support. But currently, many of them in the space are doing many similar things to vVols already. And as soon as vVols evolves to what they're not doing natively, you'll see them adopt. That's my opinion.
Okay, last topic we got. We got how many time? 2 minutes left. Flash. Let's just throw that out. We're going to see tons and tons of folks, narrating on Flash. Maybe just go through the panel here and do some closing comments. See if that kicks open any questions. If you guys want to jump in and say, from your perspectives, what do you think is really going to matter in Flash? Because the medium isn't just what's important here. What really matters when these guys are looking out, trying to make storage decisions based on Flash, what matters? Starting with...
I'd say taking care of the Flash is important because it's got a weird difference to spinning disks, but Flash is definitely the future because the problem with spinning disks is the performance is not increasing at the same rate as the performance of memory and CPUs. And we need to get that aligned with Moore's Law, and Flash is the way to do that, and the scale of Flash is going to be growing exponentially, and the price is going to keep coming down. So Flash should be in every system.
Matt?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I say there's a difference between Flash, how you analyze and use Flash now, and how you're going to analyze and use Flash in the future. And right now, the price difference just doesn't make sense for 90% of the businesses. It's all based on requirements. What does your application require? What do your users require for performance? And so I would say choose Flash now based on requirements, not based on new hotness.
Good point. Dr. J.
I think that as a representative networking guy. I think the unintended consequences are going to be the most important. The hotspots inside of a data center are shifting, and I think that with the applications and their applicability, how many times can I use that word in the same sentence? With Flash and the way that it's going to expedite some workloads, it's going to cause bottlenecks other places, and we're just simply moving it out, and we have to be very careful about those unintended consequences.
Always have been.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, next.
Hey, whack-a-mole.
So there's no question Flash is the future. Obviously with virtual SAN, we think that at this point there's still a place for magnetic disks in combination with Flash. There's definitely going to be an inflection point where different tiers of Flash in something like a hyper scale-out virtual SAN solution will make sense. Obviously, that's going to depend on performance, cost, and as mentioned, that is going to change where certain bottlenecks occur in the data center. It may not know. It may then be in a network, or depend on your network design. So it's the future, but you definitely need to look at architecture for your environment as you adopt Flash to make sure that you're ready to leverage it properly.
Could be using caching layers too, right? We didn't talk a lot
Absolutely.
about that today, but Matt, you want to finish it off, and then I'll close up one comment.
Yeah, two comments. One, I didn't realize there was a question about whether or not you should be using Flash in at least some way, shape, or form. I think the answer to that is yes, please. Certainly, the vendors would love for you to say that.
Of which we are.
Of which we all are, right?
Yeah.
So, but the other thing is I'd also comment on what Michael said, which is that magnetic disks aren't getting any faster, and they aren't. But I would argue two things. One is that neither is Flash. The actual performance of Flash has not changed since effectively the deployment of that technology. It's changed by maybe not even an order of magnitude. Fundamental different technologies like phase change and things like that are going to need to happen in order to get order of magnitude kinds of changes. So we're going to run into the exact same issue with Flash that we ran into magnetic drives. But I think the bigger issue with magnetic drives, and the solid fire people in here are going to love me for saying this, is that the real issue with magnetic drives is not the raw performance, but the unpredictability of that performance.
Yeah. So I'll close that and just say, from my perspective, I think I see a lot of CIOs doing flash-first strategies, and it's because, in a lot of cases, it can start to become as cheap as disk or relatively close enough. The problem, though, is that flash solves a lot of problems downscale, but at order of magnitudes, the more you go upscale, in the tens of thousands of VMs, flash will not fix the issues. If the network isn't right, Flash is not going to fix that.
It'll exacerbate it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so look at the architectural differences both in your environment and also in the players that you choose from in terms of how they address scale with Flash, because that ultimately is what's going to matter in the big enterprise environments. So with that, I think we're up against the clock. Is there any last question? Maybe one last one? Anyone got a zinger for anybody? You better have a good one.
That's not hyper-converged appliance related?
I thought that was bigger.
Everything can run hyper-converged.
So thinking about Flash for local caching solutions like Flash Cache and some other vendors.
Yep.
We're starting to see the PCI SSD prices go down. So is it something that you probably would recommend saying just go PCI instead of using the old, small disk?
Yeah, so I think the question was, as the price of PCIe flash comes down, and you see the rise of caching type of solutions, and you've got vSphere Recache, you've got Pernix Data, you've got a bunch of them that are really seeing a nice adoption. Is that going to become more the prevalent ranks of storage in the future, or is that a trend or a mirage?
So I would answer that with a different question: is what's your serviceability requirements and what's your failure requirements for that host? Because if you've got a physical PCIe card and that goes down, then you're going to lose that ability. But what's coming in, and it's going to be adopted very shortly, is NVMe, which is basically a 2.5-inch form factor, hot pluggable storage direct to CPU, which essentially replaces the need for a PCIe flash device, but it provides massive improvement in terms of performance.
And I think we're going to be seeing an awful lot more next year about NVMe solutions.
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
VMware.
No question.
That's just me guessing, but it's so hot right now behind the scenes.
And it's not even so much.
All right, you did this. We were supposed to be finishing up. We blame you.
So a good controversial way to end it, because the question is, do we bring the workloads up closer into the PCIe bus for all the server vendors in the room? And with that, I think we're way out of time. So this has been the first round of opening acts for the vBrownbag VMworld 2014. I want to thank you guys for coming. How about a round of applause for the panel?
I was hoping somebody would say NVMe.